Hello everybody and welcome to the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown. 33 or 30 days remaining, I think. Wow, the 30s just kind of flew by, didn't they? Remaining until the launch of Guild Wars 2. We had a couple of episodes missing after the beta, like the fallout from the beta. I've actually been producing pretty much an entire series that's going to be going out every other day or so, of the jumping puzzles with Magical Mike. You've already seen a fair few of those, but there's a lot more to come. We actually managed to find, and to this date nobody has shown me anything that we didn't get. We have actually, I'm 99.999% sure that we found every single puzzle achievement in the game. So those achievements for doing all those jumping puzzles, we found them all. There were a few extra on the list because in fact those were in areas that aren't accessible in the beta as we know it, but we did manage to get all the ones that were available, so it's really quite cool and they'll all be going up. However, that's not going to be replacing the countdown or anything like that. I know we had a couple of days missing, but I do know a lot of you don't want to spoil it for yourself, so that's totally fine. We'll be continuing with the countdown stuff daily as we go forward. First of all, I just wanted to open up with a massive thank you to everyone that sent me little pictures of potatoes and stuff for the calendar. There are still a lot of spaces left with that. I think I've got like the next 10 to 15 days covered, which is awesome, and some people have done loads. Thank you very much to them. But if you fancy drawing a potato for that little image we have at the end of these episodes, feel free to just personal message me with it, with a link to it, and don't worry about putting it on the calendar. Just give me the potato itself, because then I can actually put it on the calendar myself, and it just it's a whole lot easier doing it that way than me having all these different images of calendars and trying to slot people into days. I can just do it easier that way. So anyway, thank you to everyone who's done that, and the opportunity is still out there for everyone else if you want to have your little potato appear on one of these countdown things. I don't know what I want for the last day yet, so we'll have to watch out for that. Anyway, because we had a few days missing, there has been a lot of news and stuff that's built up. Ariantha, in fact, has sent me so many links and things that I can possibly cover them all. I do really want to start covering them in more depth, but if you actually dare look in the description, I'm sure you'll find tons and tons of stuff there if you really have a Guild Wars 2 itch that you need to scratch today. And I'll talk about some of the ones that caught my eye mostly. I've got a few questions as well. I kind of cleaned out through all my personal messages, loads of interesting questions and stuff I wanted to talk about. And also I wanted to cover the news today, so hopefully a bit of a longer episode where we can actually make up for those a couple of missed days. So what happened in the missed days? So, well, we had beta, obviously, the final Guild Wars 2 beta. Do bear in mind that we might be able to get back in game though before launch if another stress test occurs. I wouldn't put it past them to do another stress test. It actually seems to have been pretty regular, so I mean, we can't really say it's that regular. There haven't been too many just yet, but it seems like maybe a couple of weeks after beta we might find another stress test. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. That could be quite cool. Generally, my impression of the beta was really, really good. I loved a lot of what came out of it. I loved a lot of the Tarnished Coast areas and the way a lot of the areas came across, especially like the Tengu Wall and stuff like that. I thought was fantastic. It does feel like the game is pretty much ready for launch. I still have my concerns about various things, as you guys know, but yeah, I was very impressed with the beta. Apparently, a lot of people have been talking about actually the most recent beta being far too easy. I am an advocate of having kind of challenging gameplay, so you do have to engage your brain a little bit, but at the same time, I would say that I can understand why the game's getting slightly easier for early game PvE stuff. First of all, because it's early, and second, it's very hard to have something like an MMO where people tend to just play hours and hours and hours at the time, where people are being required to be at their absolute maximum the whole time. I don't actually think that works too well, and there's nothing wrong with having the majority of PvE content easier than some of the harder bits. And that's the same for every game. You can't always be at maximum difficulty all the time, so maybe some people have some unreasonable expectations there, but apparently there have been a few videos and things that have come out of people just doing ridiculous stuff like tanking enemies that are way, way stronger than them and having absolutely no problem. So we'll see, but I mean, we've only seen early game stuff, so that expectation shouldn't be there for people to be in really, really difficult content the whole time, I don't think, because especially with Guild Wars 2, there's an MMO that has a very different and far more active combat system than other MMOs, so people are learning stuff, so let them learn stuff in early game bits and pile it on as we move forward, which hopefully they'll do. One thing I did actually want to say on that note of things changing as you get to further and closer to sort of end game or higher level areas, if you will, a lot of people have been saying that hearts become less and less frequent as you progress through the game, and they're saying, oh, that's why, you know, it doesn't matter that people are so focused on hearts at the moment and eventually the focus will be in events. Actually, that's not true. We only know that the hearts will be entirely non-existent in Ore. I've seen a lot of people coming out with this argument that, oh, slowly there's just going to be less and less hearts, so don't worry if the renown system's not amazing. That isn't actually true. People are just speculating that. ArenaNet have never said that. It seems very much to me like the entire game, and we've never heard anything to the contrary, that the entire game is going to be full of hearts, and that's going to be one of your primary things for map completion. The focus will remain on map completion and those hearts for the majority of the game, nearly all of the game, until you get to ore, when there's just going to be a cut-off point. So I did want to mention that at the very least, because that's not true, and a lot of people seem to have got the idea. Anyway, right, yeah, news. So after the beta occurred, there were a couple of ArenaNet blog posts that came out today. Was it today? I think it was today. In particular, was one about the 4 pillars of Guild Wars 2 gameplay, or just the pillars of Guild Wars 2 gameplay. This is kind of, I guess, their follow-up to the MMO manifesto trailer they did a while ago. The manifesto trailer wasn't the first trailer for the game, and I was most hyped by the first trailer, I've got to admit, because it had been a long time. A lot of people thought the game could be vaporware, and we were all a little bit scared, and then all of a sudden we had this amazing trailer. But having said that, the manifesto trailer seems to have been what got most people interested in Guild Wars 2 and made most people sit up, because this was where the first time ArenaNet managed to get out to a large audience that they were trying to do something really different with the game, and that, I think, is what excited a lot of people. That's kind of where that started. I mean, if you were really closely following the game because you were a fan of Guild Wars 1 and you just kind of moved on from that like I had, you just transitioned from there, you might have already seen ArenaNet were trying to do slightly different things before that MMO manifesto came out, but I suppose back then it was pretty easy to imagine it was just a bit of PR talk or whatever. And then this one came out, and a lot of people really got really interested in the game, and I think it really was the most significant trailer they did. So now, actually, now that release is coming, they've done a blog post where they're kind of revisiting what they said in the manifesto video about all the stuff they were trying to achieve with Guild Wars 2 and how they think they've done it. And they've come up with this idea that there are 4 pillars of Guild Wars 2 gameplay, and they've given us a video on each about what these pillars are and how they feel they are integral to the game and how they're kind of pushing MMOs and stuff. So there's actually 4 videos you can see. One is on PvP, which is one of the pillars. Another pillar is combat. Another one is dynamic events, and the other one is personal story. They're all around 5 minutes long. Each one's got a different developer that you'll probably recognize if you follow ArenaNet reasonably closely, talking about their specialized subject, I suppose. And yeah, just generally really, really interesting. I quite like it. So they've put out 4 videos. There's been a lot of spam from the ArenaNet YouTube channel, actually, because they've been really good. Obviously, the game is coming out in English, French, and Spanish, I believe, are the 3 languages that it's coming out in, right? And recently they've been very good at making sure everything they do is translated into those other languages. Like, all the blogs now have got translated versions, and it's all that out there. And it's the same with these videos too. So now you've got 4 English videos have gone up, and then 4 in the other languages too, and there's just been a bit of spam. But it's really cool. So if you want to check it out, then it's all over there on their channel. Also, another weird thing, I don't know why, a couple of hours ago they seem to have re-uploaded the get ready trailer, the one with the countdown that I've been using at the start of my countdown videos, that poof noise at the start, where we saw what we thought was Zaitan, but it's probably not Zaitan. That trailer with all the cuts, that's been re-uploaded with USK in parentheses. I'm not actually sure why they did that, but that's there too. In other news for blog posts, there was a reminder to people, and I will happily remind people as well about this, about the Guild Wars 1 Platinum Edition. This was released a long time ago, kind of when the game first hit its first kind of lull, I guess, after Eye of the North had kind of been released. This is a package of Guild Wars Prophecies, which was the original campaign that took place on the same continent we'll be playing in Guild Wars 2, so you see a lot of the same areas. You'll see Ascalon, you'll see Kryta 250 years ago, and bundled with it is Eye of the North, which is the one and only expansion to Guild Wars 1 that gives you access to the Hall of Monuments, where you can dedicate rewards and stuff you found in Guild Wars 1 for extra stuff in Guild Wars 2. So they reminded everyone about this package you can get, the Guild Wars Platinum Edition. I think they said it was $20, or it could have been $15, maybe it's dropped to now. It's pretty cheap though, it's pretty good. I mean, there is a hell of a lot of content in Guild Wars 1. I do get a lot of people now saying to me, that they see Guild Wars 1 gameplay and it just feels too old and stale to them now, which is a fascinating thought to me because, you know, having spent so much time on the game myself, you don't really realise, I think, how dated things get if you're still kind of enjoying them on some level. But, I mean, it shouldn't put off too many people. I would give everyone every chance I can to just be aware that you can get Guild Wars 1 pretty cheap these days, and it's subscription feeless, so there's really not anything to lose by picking it up. You could just get a few points before Guild Wars 2's launch, and then you have a game that you can always go back to whenever you want. Now, it's no coincidence that they've just mentioned and reminded us about the Guild Wars Platinum Edition, because in addition to this, there was another blog post by Jon Stummy, who is, or was, I'm not quite sure what's going on there anymore, but for a long time he was like the lead on Guild Wars 1 new content that was coming out, so those later chapters of Guild Wars Beyond and a lot of the skill balance and stuff like that. They haven't had, or still have perhaps, a very small team at ArenaNet that's still working on the first game and providing updates and things, right? And Jon Stummy, it was a couple of years ago now, I guess, has kind of been the lead of that team and been heading all that stuff. Well, there's a video out of him talking about the Hall of Monuments, just explaining what it is to people, that it's a place, it's a website, and it's a place in Guild Wars 1 where you can dedicate rewards from the first game to have rewards in the second game. What's really cool about this video, I mean, I'm pretty sure most of us know about the Hall of Monuments at this point and have probably already picked up the first game to play it and grab those extra points before the launch. But what was really interesting about this video, and what was new in the video, was the fact that they're actually showing off for the first time some of the rewards. We've always known what the rewards were, or we've known what they were for a very long time since the calculator came out, so we'd heard of the Orion undead chicken mini pet that you could get. We'd heard of it, but we'd never actually seen it except for just a small icon. Well, now it seems they're showing some of that off, so in this video you can check some of those things out. I mean, that in particular is on there. There's kind of an icy hammer there. This stuff's pretty cool. I mean, it's not incredibly amazing stuff. I think he actually calls it 20% more awesome than you might currently have, which is good. So they're not going to overpower legendaries or anything, but you will feel pretty cool, and they are some interesting unique items that can't be obtained in any other way, and it's a nice way to show that kind of you've been with a franchise for a long time. So yeah, we've actually started to see those. Whether we'll see more as time goes forward, I got the impression there might be another video after watching that one, but we'll see. Yeah, it's an interesting video though, so even if you do know what the calculator is, you can check it out. Again, it will all be in the description among all the other stuff, so no worries about that. Anyway, so that's all of the news on the ArenaNet side of things, at least. I'm sure lots of stuff's been happening in the community. In fact, I know a lot of people have gathered a lot of really cool stuff from the beta. Like, for example, some guys, I think it was over on Guru, they actually managed to get images of every single, like, armor that you could get from the Ascalonian catacombs, which is crazy. It never occurred to me that for one set of armor, actually, if every single player's race and sex and armor class can wear it, that's actually 30 different armors they have to design for every single one set. So when the game was first coming out, I was expecting them to have to do a fair few sets, but it didn't really dawn on me that for one set it would be that. So if we've got 8 dungeons, right, that's 30 for each of those 8, and then we have the racial set as well, so every race also has an additional one for themselves, as well as all the stuff on the calculator. That's such a hell of a lot of armor that you can get from like endgame-ish stuff, not to mention that everything else that's around can be transmuted. It's pretty nuts, and I never actually considered how much there'd be. But yeah, people have got stuff like that. There have been some great secrets. One guy like found an organ that was out in the Caledon forest, and you could actually play the Guild Wars theme on it, and if you did so, a chest would spawn in out of like an oyster, and all kinds of really, really cool stuff. There was this amazing thing in Lion's Arch that I never actually got footage of, that if you went really high up, you could jump into this hollow pipe, and you would fall all the way down into this underwater tunnel that you could swim along really low beneath Lion's Arch for ages and ages and ages, and eventually it'd take you out into like this garden with like this dead troll in it, and all kinds of cool stuff. It's pretty nuts, the crazy little things and secrets that people have managed to find in the beta. You can find links to all this and way more. Loads of stuff's been happening in the community. Some guys are trying to make a machinima, the first Guild Wars 2 machinima going on. I'm very curious to see how that will go. I mean, MMOs are okay, I guess, for machinimas because you get emotes and stuff, but still, it's not the easiest thing in the world. But yeah, there's that, and there's lots more. Anyway, so I had quite a few personal messages that I was reading through. Some of them caught my eye. They're not necessarily all questions, but things that I had further thoughts on, and cool theories. A lot of people message me a lot of theories about lore stuff, which is very interesting. It's sometimes hard to talk about on the videos because it's just a theory, and it's like, because it's a theory, I can't say, oh yes, this is true or not. You can't really add anything beyond that. But there were some very interesting ones. First of all, Vedthurlfalnir said, while watching your videos, I noticed a curious correlation, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. In the lore, the sand in the crystal desert is described as being made up of tiny crystals. I'm also going to assume that the same would be true for when the region was covered by sea. It seems that Kralkatorrik makes its home in the crystal desert, and its old lieutenant, Glint, also lived there. Kralkatorrik is also known as being the Crystal Dragon, and Glint's mission in Guild Wars was in her crystallized realm. That was actually in one of the crystal grains of sand, by the way. So, I suppose that region was Kralkatorrik's home the last time it was awake, and had covered the region in crystals back then. Over time, these would have eroded into the crystal sand that we have now. If Kralkatorrik's home is in the crystal desert, then what do you suppose it was doing when it died, or fell asleep, or put to sleep, up north in the Grothmar War Downs? I think that is a fantastic theory, and I have often wondered about this, the fact that it's called the Crystal Desert, and then you've got Kralkatorrik, the Crystal Dragon, and Glint had a crystal lair, and it all ties together. I'm 100% sure that when ArenaNet first designed the Crystal Desert, that they didn't consider it was going to ever have anything to do with some giant beast that was there, but it really does interest me that this does tie in together, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did eventually say that this is exactly what happened. Kralkatorrik had a loads and loads of crystals. I mean, look at him right now in the brand. Look at what he did just flying over that area. And look at, we don't actually have a name for that place where he's sitting, but you can see how branded the whole place is around it. There's a huge stretch, miles and miles around, just full of purple crap all over the place, and it's all crystallized, just this massive expanding sort of center where the crystals are. And I suppose that could have just expanded and expanded in the past until eventually it all eroded away and, like you say, became the desert. I mean, the thing to consider is this whole region has got so much history of just loads changing with it, because originally we knew it, in the very first instant, we knew it as just a sea, right? That was our earliest thoughts of what it was. But the suggestion there is that it was only a sea because Abaddon, one of the original gods to come to Tyria and start shaping it and terraforming it, he was the god of water, and that was kind of his region, his area. These are the insinuations, at least, that this was kind of his place. And when he was cast down as the god of water, that whole section dried up. The Crystal Desert and the Desolation, that whole section was once ocean and waters, and the Margonites sailed on it. But then when Abaddon fell, that's when it dried up. So then the question is, what about before Abaddon even got there? Was it originally a desert? And was it originally a desert because Kralkatorrik had been here and this was just like literally a crystal desert? I mean, that's a pretty fantastic thought, isn't it? And it really is curious, because we've kind of thought for a long time now, right, well, the original state of this land, of this area, was that it's an ocean. Well, maybe no, the original state is that it's because Kralkatorrik was there. And what about before Kralkatorrik was there? Was the original state of it then? And then I guess you're getting into the point where you're talking so long ago in Tyrian history that entire mountains and stuff could have moved. And I mean, you look at how much the Fire Island chain has changed from the Guild Wars 1 maps to the Guild Wars 2 maps. A lot of people say it's just because it's an active volcanic chain, but really, you look at these significant differences in the landscape, and you can say that Tyria clearly moves a lot. In fact, a really common theme of the stories and the writing in the Guild Wars universe are massive changes to the environments. One of the first things we experience is the Searing, which completely devastates and changes Ascalon. And then we have this idea of the Crystal Desert, that sure, there was a hint back in prophecies that it had been an ocean once before, but it wasn't laid on very thick. When Nightfall came around, they introduced this other massive change, that the Crystal Desert had become an ocean. And in factions, we have probably the biggest one. We've got two whole places, the Echovald Forest and the Jade Sea. The massive chunk of that game, one of the most exciting and pivotal things about the story, is the fact that there were these two areas that were completely corrupted and changed by the Jade Wind. It's something that happens a lot in the Guild Wars writing, and massive changes to areas like this are very common. And I think it's very fitting, therefore, that Guild Wars 2 now is talking about all these Elder Dragons waking up and shaping and changing the world so much. I mean, now we have loads of changes, even more of them now, and I think that's just something that, if you're going to look at Tyria from like an in-universe standpoint, that's something you can say about that. The universe, or at least Tyria itself, is a planet that is constantly changing a hell of a lot. I mean, and I think that also makes it a little bit easier to swallow some of these things we've seen on that big map that we found the other day, which, by the way, somebody actually mentioned to me, apparently that map texture could be on the giant statue that was built by the 5 races in Lion's Arch. I don't know if you guys saw it. It's kind of near the plaza where the 5 gates are. It's quite big. It's got all these little mechanical boats floating around it, and those were supposedly created by the Asura. And then there's a big statue there, and the idea is that each race came along and added something more. Like the Sylvari added the water features to it, and the Asura provided all the little mechanisms for it and stuff like that. And apparently there's this big globe on it, and that could actually have the same texture as the one we analysed in the other video. So anyway, back to the original point of Kralkatorrik and maybe being the cause of the entire desert. It wouldn't surprise me. What I just love is that they seem to have found a way to tie it all in together, which is really cool. Obviously, it's all speculation at this point, and I doubt we'll even see whether this is true at launch. It won't be until we get to the Crystal Desert that maybe we get some real answers. But if the idea that Glint's lair is within a single grain of sand, just a normal grain of sand in the Crystal Desert, and when you're in the lair you can see it's clearly just made of actual big kind of crystals, then, and we can say that the entire desert is just like that, then yeah, it wouldn't surprise me for a second that that all came somehow from Kralkatorrik, which could be really cool. The other idea I like is when it was the Crystal Sea, that you had all these little crystalline shards floating around all over the place and making it like glow and stuff in a really pretty colour. Anyway, moving on, the next personal message comes from Dill3R, who said, couldn't the Nightmare Court have been easily prevented? Cadian is a difficult character, and the Firstborn just talked him down, that he should meditate, and that he's not special and not Firstborn, etc. Shouldn't they care more? Treat him better? I think he was right when he was angry about the Asura Malamides thing. It was a serious mistake by the Asura, and it seems like the Sylvari were like, no problem, mistakes happen. Peace? War is not the answer, but they should have been at least angry. I think Cadian was also right about the crate eggs. If he, as the first non-Firstborn, firstborn is evil, doesn't that mean the tablet is imperfect, or at least one firstborn is also evil or has experienced a lot of horror? Maybe the one Sylvari who went to Or. It could have been an adventurer who visited the Pale Tree before the Sylvari were born too, but I think that's unlikely. I think Cadierne is an interesting character, and it wasn't evil at all from the beginning. He just questioned the tablet and thought the Sylvari as a whole needed to think more logically. Quote, again, the firstborn quote the tablet when I asked for logic. He growled beneath his breath, I do not agree. If the Sylvari rely on the tablet alone, doesn't that make them weak and naive? You, sir, have just basically written out what I find most interesting about the Sylvari, and I wish more people were interested in this kind of interesting, cool stuff, rather than how Sylvari eat and how they have sex and all that kind of bollocks that everyone constantly goes on. This is the good stuff. This is what makes the Sylvari really unique and interesting. And you are totally right about all of this. If this has just gone over everybody's head, I should explain. There was a blog post that was released during Sylvari week. So we had a load of blog posts that came out that talked a lot about the race, introduced the race to people in a way that they could understand. And one of these blog posts in particular told the story of a Sylvari named Cadierne. Now, as you might or might not know, the Sylvari are born, or originally were born in generations. You had the firstborn, and then the firstborn thought they were it. That was it. There were no other Sylvari on Tira. But then all of a sudden, the tree flowered again, and a second generation came along. And Cadierne was the first of the secondborn to come out. So he comes out of the tree, and he's like, yes, I'm first. This is amazing. And all the firstborn that were already there, they're like, well, no, we're first. And the pale tree itself, you know, the spirit that is the tree, that inhabits the tree, that, you know, they're one and the same. This spirit seems to favour the firstborn over the Sylvari that come after it. So Cadierne kind of comes into this world, and he has these problems, and he wants to talk to the pale tree and communicate with her, but he's just kind of not getting anywhere. And this blog post goes on and tells basically his story and his interpretations of things that he sees around Tyria. And as he travels and sees stuff, he eventually kind of begins to doubt the tablet. He starts to think that Sylvari, when they are originally brought into the world, are being influenced negatively by this tablet. Like, the tablet is corrupting what it is to truly be Sylvari, because the tablet has all these rules and things that all the Sylvari try to adhere to. But he started thinking, no, this tablet isn't right, we should be going to war, we should be doing this or this. So one particular point of contention is the fact that when the Asura first found the Sylvari, who were very close to them in the Tarnished Coast, the Asura started experimenting on them, thinking they were just sort of mimicking sentient life, basically, and just started messing around with the Sylvari and seriously causing damage to them. So Cadierne comes out and he's like, we should kind of get revenge on them, but the tablet is like, no, we should have peace. So anyway, Cadierne basically sees all these points that he thinks quite logical, and the other Sylvari just fob him off and tell him, no, the tablet says otherwise. So he ends up going off and forming the Nightmare Court, which essentially is trying to undermine the influence that the tablet has on the rest of the Sylvari. He's trying to make it so that the Sylvari follow their kind of natural instincts for aggressiveness whenever that might come about. So it's a really deep, interesting story, and really this blog post is most poignant about establishing that the Nightmare Court are not evil. They are just doing what they think is logical. And it goes really deep, and you can have a lot of really good discussions and conversations about who is really right. Now, for the purpose of the game, then we kind of have to take the stance that the Nightmare Court are wrong, and for the purpose of the game, pretty much we're just going to be seeing Nightmare Court Sylvari doing evil stuff, and we're not going to question it, and I doubt it will be as deep as really the lore has it written, but it is very cool. And I love this personal message because it's clearly the guy's just read the blog post and he's thought, oh, this is bullshit, what's going on here? And it's good. The ArenaNet very much understand, and I think everyone should understand that that's on purpose. It's supposed to be ambiguous. You're supposed to take a side, and I think it's really, really cool that the Sylvari do this to people, and that is, in my opinion, the most interesting thing about the race. Also, that and other theories that have been coming out lately that suggest maybe the Pale Tree itself is an elder dragon, like one form of it, because they are very similar to that. Really, really cool theory. I'd suggest you guys check it out, or maybe I can talk about it in a future video, but yeah, that's a cool thing as well. Anyway, the thing I wanted to end on today was a comment Ariantha made to me about players from World of Warcraft coming to Guild Wars 2. She basically said, I managed to get myself into an argument yesterday. She comes from World of Warcraft. What is your viewpoint on World of Warcraft players playing Guild Wars 2? I seem to have encountered a lot of hostility from people who don't seem to think having 11 million players support of the game is important. I think people shouldn't be hostile, to be honest. I think no matter where you come from, you shouldn't sneer at people just because they're coming from World of Warcraft. Well, really, I wanted to mention this because I've seen this as well a lot, and really you can't deny the fact that World of Warcraft is the biggest MMO, and a lot of people are going to be transitioning over from that. I think the market of people that have never played an MMO but are hoping Guild Wars 2 to be their first is probably smaller than the market of people that are kind of just sick with existing MMO conventions like those in World of Warcraft and now want something new, something fresh, something different. I think that there is always a bit of a problem with people coming from other games, especially when your game is touting to be something totally new, because the truth is I think a lot of us want something new, but at the same time we want that familiarity. So where stuff like the endgame raids, where these big differences are in Guild Wars 2, I think there is a good chance that people coming from other games, not just WoW but other MMOs, they might miss those things, and there is a chance that they will decide that they don't like Guild Wars 2 because they're not comfortable with it. People like to always go back to what they're comfortable with, and that's perfectly fine, but at the same time you need to offer people something new. So it's this difficult line developers have to walk. Thankfully I'm not one, so I don't have to walk it. I think one thing that people always forget about is the fact that Guild Wars 1 was made up of a hell of a lot of people that were just playing Guild Wars as a second MMO, and people forget that. Back then, that was like one of the only sub-fee free games. It was one of the only ones that was out there. It was just you would buy it and then that was it. And Guild Wars 1 had this amazing advantage in the fact that its servers very rarely ever went down. You know, they had the streaming updates, which was a technology other MMOs still haven't quite caught up with, and a lot of people said it's because, oh, Guild Wars 1 isn't persistent so they can do it, but Guild Wars 2 is doing the streaming updates thing as well, so clearly that's not it. But the Guild Wars 1 had this nice situation where people could always rely on it to be online, and they could always rely on the fact that they had access to it because they didn't have to keep paying for it. So when their MMOs went offline, they would go to Guild Wars 2 as their second game, or when their friends were offline, when, you know, their community wasn't about, they maybe wanted to play a game, an MMO, but no one was around at the time, they could always fall back to Guild Wars 1. And I think people forget just how large of a percentage of people that played Guild Wars 1 really were that did this exact thing. Guild Wars 1, in its heyday, it was at about 5 million copies sold, right? It's about 7 million now, but that's only trickled through in the last few years. So we had about 5 million people who owned it and played it, but not necessarily 5 million that were super active and were doing all the endgame stuff and playing it every single day. Most of those people were just doing it kind of as a second game that they could hop back into, whether that be for PvE stuff or PvP stuff. And I'm not going to be surprised to see that Guild Wars 2 will fall into the same boat. I mean, looking at the releases as well, Guild Wars 2 on the 28th of August, and then the next expansion for World of Warcraft will be coming out about a month after that. I very much expect that during that first month we'll probably have a lot of WoW players in it, and then they realise that they're not entirely comfortable with it. That next expansion will come out, and then they'll move over to World of Warcraft again for a while. But they'll be back, and it will be the same situation as we had in Guild Wars 1. I think there'll be a lot more people playing it regularly, but also a lot more people playing it as a second MMO. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's giving ArenaNet the money, and then they don't need to pay for all the server resources. So, no, there's no point to have any of this hostility. If people from other games come to it, complain about certain stuff because they're not comfortable with the changes, then fine, let them do it, because then they'll leave, and then they'll probably come back when Guild Wars 2 has expansions of its own, or when new stuff comes out there too. So really, I don't understand it. It's just people picking camps, being children, and saying, oh, my game's better than yours, and then the other person saying, no, it's not, and here's why. It's all a bit stupid, but hey, it's the internet. That's the kind of thing that happens. But for me, no, I don't care if people play it as a second MMO, and I don't care if they come from another MMO. There we go, guys. That was the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown for today. I no idea how much of this I'm going to cut out or how long it will be. Once again, in the description there will be tons and tons and tons of stuff. Just realised I haven't credited whoever's footage I've been using this entire time. So let's have a look there. Looks like it will be Finks or PHNX Gaming, so thank you very much to them, and you can also find them in the description down below. So thank you very much, guys, for that, and I guess I will see you tomorrow for more goodness.